Okay, I am the anti-theocrat, back with another one. There might be a bit of noise in the background. Those people who I live with, the ones that, how's the quote go from Rocky Horror? It was on TV last night. The ones who keep me insane inside insanity, but if they went away, they'd throw away the key. It's not quite a direct quote, but it's near enough. Yeah, family noise in the background. Going to read through a report today, see what we can dig out of it, see what's there. There's some interesting stuff right up front. I'm just not sure what they came to with conclusions and things. I'm not sure if I'm happy with the way they've assessed certain things, but let's have a look, shall we? I've only briefed this. This will be more or less a first go over. Okay, the Australian Government, Australian Institute of Criminology. Now, this is an interesting time for this to come out because, or to come up in my feed, because we've got a feminist-hated investigation into the family court system going on at the moment. And this is the sort of thing that we would never hear about from the feminists, so it's interesting to me that it comes out now. It plays against everything that they say their system is supposed to be protecting us from, men. Because this is female perpetrated intimate partner homicide. Yeah, it's taking a look at the women who commit homicide. Indigenous and non-Indigenous offenders. And I know there are differences, so I'm quite fine with them having defined in this document. Digging through, we got the contents, and I'm just going to scroll this. I did mark pages, but in the long run I'm going to go through far too much of it. I don't need to know the acknowledgements, nor does anyone else, surely. The acronyms, well, the abstract. The current study was commissioned by the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet to examine the roles of offender characteristics, historical circumstances and situational factors in female-perpetrated intimate partner homicide. Now, this is interesting because this is not the sort of thing the government seems to normally have an interest in, and how these factors may differ between Indigenous and non-Indigenous offenders. The sample is based on 115 female intimate partner homicide offenders recorded in the National Homicide Monitoring Program between 2004 and 2014, with additional supplementary data from police, coronial and court records and findings highlighting that, while the intimate circumstances within which female perpetrated intimate partner homicide occur are varied, offenders are often involved in violent relationships and have backgrounds of criminal activity, unemployment, and substance misuse. So, even in the abstract, they've managed to throw in some excuses, and I'm going to say they're excuses because this is exactly how they would normally be used by the feminist feminazis. The feminazis, we'll just say the feminazis and get that out of the way. Yet it's exactly the same things we know about male offenders. So why this is mentioned, I guess this study had to cover that. It does seem weird that it is covered, put forward in the abstract along with this more insipid information, just the basic information, as if it was laying down an excuse. I don't know. Maybe that was the plan, maybe that wasn't. The executive summary. The majority of homicides perpetrated by women are against a male intimate partner. So, although we know lesbian relationships are very violent, it seems women don't kill women. They seem to kill men. An interesting point. Despite this, little Australian research has examined the offender's characteristics, probably worldwide, but go ahead. Historical circumstances and situational factors of female-perpetrated intimate partner homicide, and whether these conditions are different for Indigenous and non-Indigenous women. To examine this knowledge gap, the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet commissioned the Australian Institute of Criminology to undertake research into female-perpetrated domestic violence and homicide. The current study uses a descriptive and exploratory approach to analyse these factors in homicides committed by Indigenous and non-Indigenous women against their male partners. Fair enough. I don't know how else you'd do it. The only real worry is the reporting by police and the legal system of women committing crimes and how it's reported. And I think that is a problem. I'm hoping that it'll come up. The study population comprised of women aged 18 and over with the murder of a male intimate partner in Australia between 1st of January 2004 and 30th of June 2014. I'm not sure why they started in January and ended in June. 2 different years by us. That's our calendar year and our financial year. But there you go. The ASIC National Homicide Monitoring Program was the primary data source for the study. The NHMP collates data from all homicide incidents, victims and offenders recorded by state and territory police. Data from the NHMP was supplemented and with information drawn from the police records and coronial findings stored on the National Coronial Information System and publicly available case law documents, which were used to examine variables outside the scope of the NHMP. The latter data were available for a subset of offenders identified in the and collaborated in the intimate partner homicide supplementary data set. Intimate partner homicide is the most common type of female perpetrated homicide, particularly amongst Indigenous women. Got to stop falling into this women's thing. Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? That women kill their partners more than they kill men outside relationships, whereas men kill other men outside relationships far often than they kill them in relationships. I don't know how that works or why that matters, but okay. Between the 1st of January 2004 and yes, dates given, incidents of female perpetrated homicide were recorded involving 317 adult female offenders, including 115 intimate partner homicide offenders. Okay. 96 family homicide offenders. I'm not sure. Intimate partner is different from family? Does that... I'm not sure how they're defining the differences there. Let's see. 86 non-family homicide offenders. So when I was younger, I had my flatmate not abuse me and got a boyfriend to try and smash my face in. She would have been a non-family homicide offender, yet in a domestic situation, I guess. And 20 homicide offenders in which the relationship was the victim, with the victim was not stated or was unknown. Okay. Compared with non-Indigenous offenders, Indigenous female homicide offenders were significantly more likely to have killed an intimate partner than another family member or non-family victim. Okay. Many offenders were in established relationships with the victim, around half of which were characterised by domestic violence. Female IPH offenders were typically in relationships at the time of the homicide. The majority of relationships were characterised by a history of domestic violence committed by the offender, victim, or both. Okay, I might come back to that at some point. Committed by the offender, victim, or both. Among the 15 incidents where the direction of the violence was stated, women were either primary victims of male perpetrated violence, apparently in 53% of cases, or simultaneous perpetrators and victims of reciprocal violence in 47% of cases. So almost in half of the cases, the women were reciprocal. In no relationship was violence described as perpetrated only by the female against the male partner. Now, I have to wonder whether or not the male partner might have meant he didn't have the voice to say, I never did nothing. But up here, they're almost suggesting that this, I don't know, committed by the offender, both victim, or both. So they ask, see, they stipulate both or offender, which means it's different from what this says. Women frequently killed their intimate partners in a single, spontaneous episode of violence following some type of conflict with the victim. In many incidents, the male partner physically or sexually assaulted the woman immediately prior to her killing him. In many incidents, they're saying 28% of the time, but you know, this is has been used as an excuse for a long time. I do have to wonder where they make sure this information is true. I am going to question a lot of shit that is claimed in this document, just so you know, because I've heard the stories pretty much all my life of how men cause the situations they end up in, but I have also, for the last 30 years, listened to men telling me how they were always the victims. And in the abusive relationships that I've been in, they're mild compared to this sort of stuff. I've never been the person who was particularly abusive. Now, my current wife and myself, we rub up against each other in certain ways, but it's not domestic abuse as such. It's disagreements over things. It's mainly her culture and mine clashing, if anything. But I'm not violent. She's not violent for that matter. So, yeah, I've been violated. Let's just say I've been violated more often than I have violated anyone. Mainly because I can't think of anyone I've actually violated. So yes, with what I've heard and I know, and my life of experience around this, I question whether or not the men actually offered any physical or sexual assault, or that it was 28%. I assume some probably did, but 28%. Especially in the 2000s. I just don't know. Female homicide offenders often had backgrounds of criminal activity, unemployment, substance misuse, and mental health problems. So, look, this is exactly the same thing often said about the men who commit these crimes, right? This is not new, and we hear more and more about men having undiagnosed mental issues, and we get the same excuses for women. The difference is it's allowed to be an excuse for the women. I'm going to read through this knowing that what I'm providing is the excuses that are always used, but are never offered to men who have exactly the same situations. Half of women who killed their intimate partners were unemployed at the time of the homicide incident, and 40% of the criminal history recorded by police, 42%, primarily for assault, 44%. Many had a history of mental illness. 42% of the 33 offenders from the IPHSD sample had a diagnosed mental health condition at the time of the homicide, and 15% had previously experience of mental illness. Substance use and misuse preceded most homicides. The majority of offenders consumed alcohol in the 24-hour period leading up to the homicide, and a fifth used illicit drugs. 40% of women at sentencing were identified as having alcohol misuse issues or illicit drug issues. Yes, it was used as an excuse in court. But we never allow men to get away with these excuses. A third were in a relationship where with a partner who misused alcohol. Yeah, but he wouldn't have got away with that excuse. In fact, the fact that he used alcohol will be used as one of her excuses. The adversities faced by female homicide offenders were amplified for Indigenous women. Yes, I know. The lives of Indigenous female IPH offenders were shown to be complex and characterised by adversity. Indigenous women were more likely than non-Indigenous women to be unemployed, to have criminal history, to have been in a relationship with a partner with a criminal history. Most of the Indigenous women who killed their intimate partners were in abusive relationships, and 61% had partners with violent criminal histories. Substance misuse was also prevalent. Yes, and I can tell you now that this 61% who had partners, not the intimate partners, abusive relationships, you can bet your ass that most of them were reciprocal. At the very best, reciprocal. Because I'm telling you now, Aboriginal women have an overinflated sense of wealth, I'm going to say. An overinflated sense of worth. Even when they're the one getting pissed, if the guy comes home pissed, he's always the one who's doing wrong. He's always going to be the one in the wrong position. And she's always going to be the, the one looking after the community and the kids and what have you. But I tell you, it's not my experience of Aboriginal communities. Approximately half of female perpetrated intimate partner homicides were premeditated. Now, this is the interesting bit. Approximately half were premeditated, which means women understand their weakness. Their weakness is correct. They're at a physical disadvantage to a man, which means they know that if they want to kill him, they have to do it before he knows it's going to happen. And spontaneous was only 52%. Hang on, there was a similar number of premeditated, 48%, and spontaneous, 52%. Female perpetrated IPH incidents. In instances of premeditation, women engaged in behaviours that indicated a degree of planning, such as killing a sleeping victim or recruiting offenders. Well, this is the 2 times that I was actually physically assaulted by someone I had a living relationship with, a girlfriend and a girlfriend sexual partner and a flatmate I wouldn't sleep with. Both recruited somebody else to do the hitting or to take the shots at me. Both failed spectacularly, but both tried to recruit other people to do their work for them. While spontaneous homicides exclusively included incidents that were preceded with a physical and verbal argument between the victim and the offender, no evidence of premeditation. Indigenous offenders were more likely than non-Indigenous counterparts to have conflicts related to infidelity and jealousy. Financial motives were more common amongst non-Indigenous offenders. There's some interesting information in there. That half were premeditated, and that I actually like that this study has included the recruiting of co-offenders in this. I would actually believe that often women probably do not end up accused or put behind bars because it looks like the crime of the co-offender rather than the crime of the woman. But as I said, my 2 assaults at the hands of women, they both recruited somebody else to do the work for them. So I'm not surprising, but interesting that it was in this study. The introduction. While the majority of intimate partner homicide involved female victims and male perpetrators, this study is one I might have to take a look at some point, because I think that this is not quite right. We're talking about the homicides, and there is a group keeping a record of domestic homicides, and almost every year they come up 50-50, and some of the official statistics pretty much come up that way too. But a lot of it is down to these people who are collecting the statistics and coming up pretty much 50-50. The last couple of years it's been more men have died than women, but yes. It's sometimes it's about how the data's collected, because the police may not report an incident as a domestic incident, or the courts might not put it through as a domestic incident, or there are just a million ways to ignore when a woman commits a crime in a domestic incident that they will use, where they will never use it with a man. A man will always have committed his crime in a domestic incident. It does skew the figures, and I have some concern over how they get these figures, and I'm concerned that this study, I know it's using the data from another study, but I would have liked to have seen a fresh look at this, because there is certainly evidence that this is not the case. Women who commit homicide are more likely to do against a male intimate partner. Female IPH has been has been understood with reference to the perpetrator's history of domestic violence victimization, which absolute bollocks. In my eyes, I think this has just been an excuse for a long time. Research shows that the majority of women who kill their partners have been subjected to an extensive period of physical and psychological abuse by their male victim. And yet in your earlier writings, your summary, you more or less said this wasn't true. You more or less said that it was very often reciprocal, and I don't think you have the information to show that quite often it's just one way. And there are other studies showing that this is often the case in relationships, that women, when there is only violence in one direction, it is more likely to be women creating that violence. And there are other studies to show that. So these things concern me when I'm reading these studies, that they seem to have chosen particular studies for these bits of information. Probably, and they went back to, yes, it doesn't matter. It just concerns me that there are other things that could have been added to that to show that there were questions about these things. In these circumstances, female IPH has been framed defensively as a measure to protect against immediate or longer term harm from their abusive partners. Yes, it has. And no, it isn't. The fact that in the you said financial motives were more common amongst non-Indigenous offenders suggests to me that this is not a defence at all. In some cases, there is no defence. It is just about money. Women in well-established long-term relationships have particular difficulty and ending abusive relationships due to damaging cumulative effect of domestic violence. I would like to say that men have the same problem, as well as entrenched dependence and investment in the relationship, and for men as well. In fact, I would say that men are more invested in their relationships because male-female relationships, the females are generally the ones who get to choose, and the men are the ones who have to do all the chasing. So I would actually say that men probably are more invested in relationships when they enter into them. In support of this, researchers found that women who kill their intimate partners, on average, older and more likely to be married, have children and be cohabitating with the victim than other female homicide offenders. Which apparently are the minority, by the way. It was right up front in this study that women generally don't kill outside relationships, that they're more likely to kill in relationships. So, but yes, married and children, I don't know if I'm listening to another excuse there, because this would be exactly the same situation with men. I would even say it is more dangerous for men because especially at the time of this study, especially at the time of this one, 2012, we're seeing men lose their children. We're seeing a hell of a lot of favouring of wives in the family court system and men just losing access to their kids. And I would say that puts men in a position of having to give a flying fuck how their relationship is going, having to give more of a fuck about their relationship than women who know they are going to walk out and get everything. But again, these studies that we're looking at, I would bet that each and every one of them was done looking at women and not giving a toss about the situation that men were in. And that's why these studies are dangerous to use as a background for anything. They just do not spell out the situations very well. Most of the research being done is being done with the massive millions of dollars of financial support the feminist-run domestic violence sector gets from the government. And it is not concerned with men in relationships, or what men suffer in relationships, or what men are getting in the way of domestic violence in relationships, or any of that sort of thing. So we never see it in these reports. Efforts to understand the risk factors for female IPH must therefore look beyond the previous victimisation experience of its perpetrators. Okay, well, I think you could have just left that out and said, we're not going to give that any time and consideration. That would have been fine with me. The fact that you did mention it, I'm concerned because, I just don't, I know how skewed a lot of this material is. There is little evidence for the role of mental health issues in female IPH perpetration. Indeed, even research examines the role. Indeed, even research examining the role of mental illness in female intimate partner violence has generated mixed feelings. Although violent female offenders broadly are more likely than their male counterparts to have a history of mental illness. See, we talk a lot about how male health issues and mental health issues go underreported. I can't rely on these statistics. mental illness, if it's unreported, goes down as not existing. It's that simple. And I know we could say, yeah, but rape goes unreported, and so, yeah, no, get fucked. I do not believe that women do not report rape. I do fully believe that men do not report health issues. I'm a man. I do not report health issues. I did my back when I was 21, and I never saw anyone for it until I couldn't get out of bed anymore. In my 30s, I had to slide sideways out of the bed, and someone said this, a really good remedial massage guy, so I still never went and saw a doctor. The remedial massage guy said, oh, you've got a disc slipped, and he popped it back in, and I've had very little trouble since. I get a little bit of pain if I'm on my feet for long periods of time. Otherwise, I'm fine. And I get out of bed every morning without any problem. But it took me 25-ish years to see someone about that problem. So, the difference between women not reporting rape and the difference between men not reporting just about fucking everything, because I've been in domestic abuse situations and not reported those as well. Staggering difference. At the extreme end of mental health illness is suicide ideation, where women are more likely, just for the record, where women are more likely to slash for attention and men are more likely to kill themselves. Men are still the single largest group who commit suicide. So if we're looking at this as an example of how we could measure mental health issues, then maybe men do have them in greater numbers. Research indicates that when a man is at risk of suicide, his partner and children are at risk of being murdered. I'm actually not going to disagree with that. I'm really not going to disagree with that, because women do the same thing. They do. I know this says men risk this, but women do this too. How many women in the last few years have driven their car full of kids into a lake, or whatever else? The woman in Queensland who ran her and her kids up the front end of a truck, wiping them all out. Because when you feel you've come to a point of no return, sometimes that point of no return includes the people around you. You can't see a future for them either. Maybe a future without you, maybe a future that you can't provide them, maybe a future you don't believe is going to happen. I mean, how many shows do there have to be about preppers prepping for the end of the world? When people get these thoughts in their head that everything's going downhill, they do stupid things. They buy up all the toilet paper. So yes, I've got no problem with this statement, except that it says when a man. Because when a woman, they will take their kids with them. However, it is unclear whether this applies to female IPH perpetrators. I'm damn sure it does. But it's unclear because I would bet that these studies never took a look at women perpetrators. It probably would have been outside the scope of what they were allowed to look at. It probably would have been dangerous for them to look at it. I've seen other studies where non-favourable results towards women meant they didn't get published, got ostracised. A recent review of approximately 20 years of coronial files in Quebec found that only 14% of female IPH perpetrators attempt suicide immediately following the homicide, compared to 43% of male perpetrators. Which again says something about whether or not the mental health of these women is driven to a final conclusion of having to commit a crime, as it would with a man in the same position, because he takes himself more often. These women will kill and not take themselves, because this is not due to some, I can't see the future holds any hope for me. And that's just point one of about 3 or 4 I could have made about that, but let's keep going, shall we? Research suggests that substance abuse is a predominant feature of female IPH. I could suggest that if the research tried to find out, it would have said the same of men. In a recent study, more than half the sample of female IPH perpetrators had previously been diagnosed with a substance misuse disorder, and the majority were intoxicated during the homicide offence. And again, I would say if they took a look at this, they might find the same for men, but they would not be using it as an excuse. Compared with men, female perpetrators were also more likely to have been hospitalised for substance misuse at some point in their lives. Yes, because nobody gives a fuck when it's men. Doesn't mean it's not happening, it just means nobody gives a fuck. And men don't complain, they don't seek help. It is important to examine female IPH perpetrators' history of contact with agencies such as social services, domestic violence support services, child protection services, and mental health and substance abuse services, which represent an important potential intervention point for supporting at-risk women before their situations escalate to homicide. It is concerning then that Yorstone found that female homicide offenders were more likely than male homicide offenders to have sought help from formal supports such as medical care, police and social services in the 6 months leading up to the homicide. So again, we're back to women ask for help more often. And I would like to see this done, which is why I support the current investigation into the family sector, the family legal sector and what have you, because I think some of these agencies aren't helping. I think some of these agencies hinder, because a lot of them do use the Duluth, well actually in Australia I would say 100% of them use the Duluth model for their basis of what they're doing. Absolutely every one of them. And I've spoken to individuals in some of these organisations who recognise that there is no support for men. They themselves know that men probably need support. Some of them have openly said men definitely need support. But talking to these people, you soon learn that their own organisations offer absolutely no support for men. Their only concern is when men harm women. That's what they're looking for. Some of them feed off the money for children, and some of them feed off the money for Indigenous, but the whole core premise is violence men do to women. And seriously, you can get that from talking to anybody. I'm in a small, remote, inland, outback town in Australia, and if I talk to any service provider, and I have done this, I learn very quickly that the organisations that they work for offer no support for men, no concern for them. Their primary concern is looking out for women. So I think some of these organisations, these women walk in the door to be told that they are victims, to be told that the man is the problem. And I think that only makes the situation worse. And I think we need to straighten this shit out, because if this woman is going to go on and commit homicide, then she was definitely a problem. She needed her problems dealt with. But if you walk in the door and get told that you're the victim, that only increases your chance of committing that homicide. Okay. Economic disadvantage is an important factor in criminal offending amongst women. See, again, this research took a look at women apparently, because it's the same for men. We know this is more of a factor in domestic violence and bad domestic situations than than gender is. Massively so. Poverty is a much better telling factor. But and I would say education, because I'm poor, but I've taken the time to educate myself. I know a lot of people who are poor who don't take that time for themselves. And if you if you're poor and you're dumb, and I'm going to say it that way, then violence becomes your out. And not just the men. But research on the role of socioeconomic status in female IPH is mixed. Some studies I'm not surprised it's mixed, because a hell of a lot of the studies are looking at the Duluth model and working from there. Some studies have found that female IPH offenders are significantly more likely than male IPH offenders to be unemployed. This is not surprising. Poorer households often have a single parent income. In the world where the middle and upper class women decided they had to enter the workforce and fucked up our economy so that single income families can no longer exist, we must all put our children in the care of somebody else to raise them, then the poorer families are going to be those who have single incomes. Even at the top end of the scale, that's likely to be the way. So yes, I don't doubt that at all, that the women are unemployed. The women are staying at home to raise the children. And I've got to say, I think there's a lot of welfare dependence and laziness involved in that. Because I live in these poor neighbourhoods. I look at the people that I see around me, and laziness and welfare dependence do seem to be problems. But research on the role of socioeconomic status in female studies have found that female IPH offenders are more likely to be unemployed, while others report female homicide offenders are less likely to be homeless than male homicide offenders, and that female IPH offenders are more highly educated than other female homicide offenders. So what they're saying here is that the women who get to stay at home and raise their kids, they're more highly educated than the women who just kill someone outside a nightclub because they're pissed and stupid. They're also saying that men are more likely to be homeless, which strikes me as another sign that male mental illness, male mental health goes unreported. It's just seen as homelessness. But there is often a cause behind homelessness. Sometimes it's family courts. Sometimes it's a loss of job. But in a lot of the cases where I've met homeless men, it has been mental health issues. So, just putting that out there, because I don't see how the women are different in this, except that when they go insane, they've often got a roof over their head. And having a roof over your head apparently has something to do with your mental condition. I don't know it. Several studies have shown that women who kill their partners are less likely to have criminal records than either men who kill their partners or women convicted of other offences. I'm not surprised. I'm really not surprised, because I've been the victim of domestic abuse by women. I never reported. I would bet my bottom dollar that a lot of this is just that women do not end up in the criminal system for domestic instances, for domestic crimes. I would bet that that's the main factor here, is that women just don't end up in the system. They end up with a slap on the wrist. They end up getting told to settle down. They end up getting ignored. Sometimes, and we know this happens, the man gets taken away and he gets accused and he gets to spend time behind bars because she abused him. So yes, I'm pretty sure that if these women have criminal backgrounds, if they are violent, then they are more likely still to have been busted for shoplifting. I just, how hard is this to see? Yet, there were studies done. Studies. In contrast, Kamen and colleagues, 2016, found a higher proportion of female IPH perpetrators compared with their male counterparts had a history of violence and non-violent offence. Higher proportion of female compared with their male counterparts. So, another study actually found that women had higher rates of criminal of offences. Well, that is interesting. I'll have to look that one up at some point. This variation could indicate that there was a subset of female IPH offenders with extensive histories of violence who initiate and escalate violence outside the self-defence situations. I fully agree. And this has been found with other studies. I'm going to dig up some of these studies and check their backgrounds, but I'm not even sure that this is a subset. I have brought this up before. The nagging wife meme, the wife chasing the husband around with a rolling pin meme, these existed before the internet. These were pre-internet memes. The idea that a woman can escalate the situation in her home to the point where violence, self-defense is actually in the hands of the man, but if he hits her, he becomes a perpetrator. Not fucking surprised at all. In a study of 60 women attending a domestic violence intervention program, Babcock and colleagues differentiated between women who were violent only in the context of their intimate relationships and women who use violence in a variety of situations, not just in conflict with their partners. Yeah, and I can imagine that happens too, but I imagine that women who use violence in any situation, I don't know, see, for years and years we've heard about men who look sweet and lovely to everyone on the outside, but in the home, they were monsters who were bashing their wives. I've got no problem believing that women do the same. Female perpetrated IPH incidents. By the way, I've been in those relationships where everyone thinks she's as sweet gets, but she's an absolute fucking cow. I'll tell you what, I never stayed in those relationships long, but you can get stuck sometimes. Female perpetrated IPH incidents can also be distinguished on the basis of offence behaviours and the immediate circumstances within which they occurred. The literature is generally differentiated between spontaneous and premeditated homicides, a distinction which closely parallels that of expressive heat of passion, and instrumental goal-orientated crimes. Premeditated crimes are those that are planned and preconceived in some way, often conducted in pursuit of explicit goals such as acquiring money or improving one's social position, and often occurring amongst strangers or in course of another crime. Okay. Spontaneous crimes are less rational, unplanned acts of anger or frustration, often emerging from arguments, brawls, or romantic tangles with other interpersonal conflicts. Yeah. Often been said how men work in domestic situations. I don't really have anything to say on that. I don't know if men premeditate. I don't think men premeditate in the same way women do, certainly. I really don't believe that. Watson and Drass, research examined a range of victim offender relationships and both male and female offenders, and found that women tended to perpetrate spontaneous, expressive homicides. Not what you found, was it? Supporting this notion, female perpetrated IPV has been linked with the expression of anger. Yes, but we used to say that of men too. Poor anger management skills and perceived lack of alternatives to violence. So women are violent because they can't see any other way to control the situation. And it's spontaneous. Yeah, look, I'm just seeing manipulative bitches here. All I'm seeing is a picture of manipulative bitches. But yeah, all right, we'll move on. However, this depiction of female homicide as unplanned expressions of uncontrolled emotion does not account for the variations found in how female homicide occurs. Indeed, instrumental motivations may be more common in incidents of female IPH than generally accepted in the literature. Thank you very much. I accept that walk back on things previously used in this document. A recent study of female perpetrated homicide incidents in South Korea found that approximately 60% were premeditated and about 30% involved an accomplice. Similarly, a systematic review of female perpetrated IPV revealed that common motivations included retaliation, control or instrumental gain, and problems managing negative emotions. These are my experience of women. We often hear the Duluth model feminists saying that it's a power thing with men over women. And I can accept that there probably is a small amount of power in the male-female, male-to-female violence narrative. The problem is the Duluth model, the people who put it together, they couldn't prove that. They could not prove that men were trying to exert power over women. But I have come across this personally, not my own relationships so much, but I have watched other people's relationships where women definitely use violence as retaliation for little things. Retaliation for not buying milk while up the shop. Also, it is very much used as a control. And you will get this from men who have been in domestic situations where they were the violated and never hit back. Where it was all about controlling them. We have several court cases have gone through and women gone to jail across the world. A case in the UK, I think it was recently, where a girl went to prison for almost starving her fella, and it appeared to all be about controlling him and controlling his life. She separated him from friends and family. A very common thing for women to do. Certainly more common than I think we note. And yes, she was just separating him from his life in order to control his life. We hear it about men all the time from the Duluth model feminists, but I do not believe that even they proved it, and I'm damn sure that if they looked at women, they would find that there. And problems managing negative emotions. Actually, at this point, I would like to mention, let me see if I can find this. No, I haven't got it up. The International Men's Conference from last year, they've just released the video from Aidan. Oh God, I can't think of his surname. Anyway, they've just released Aidan's talk about the pill. And I think in relation to managing negative emotions, it might be worth looking at her talk about what the pill does to women emotionally and to the way they perceive their relationships and so forth. So if you've got the time, look up the ICMI videos. It was released through Honey Badger Radio, and look up Aidan Powell, I think it is. I'm not sure. I'm a big fan of Aidan. She's a psychologist, or she qualified in psychology. I'm not sure what she actually refers to herself as. I'm very big on knowing her material in this field. So anyway, yeah, just on the topic of managing negative emotions, because it was an interesting talk about something that could have a major effect on our society in this particular field. There is empirical, I will try to find it and I will link it down below, okay? There is empirical evidence that women report using violence in retaliation for previous violence, and I would say for not getting the milk, or to get back at. Yeah, see, get back at doesn't always suggest violence. Not to me, because I've seen this. I've seen women go batshit crazy over the smallest affronts. I told you to mop the floor, you didn't mop the floor. I told you to grab milk while you're at the supermarket. You bought all this other crap, but you didn't get milk. Or punish their partners. Yep, that's exactly it. And both female and male perpetrators report using violence to control, except that the Duluth model, which specifically went to find male control narrative, could not prove it. I would almost bet in some way that if there were male perpetrators who claimed to have used violence for control, that it might have been a one-off situation in which it needed controlling. Maybe it was a violent situation, not of his making, and he had to bring it under control. Or he's talked to somebody who has said you were controlling her and convinced him that it was about control. Or it was an excuse. Because if the Duluth model people who are massively, the Duluth model, if you don't know of it, is tied to most of our Western legal systems in some way or another. There are some variations on it from place to place, but essentially it is built around the principle that men hit women. Only men, only women, and it is all about power. Its claim is the only reason for male on female violence is power. So I assume that sometimes men ending up talking to people about this end up being convinced that they are doing it for the purpose of controlling. Dominate and humiliate their partners. Yeah, I don't know about dominating. Humiliating, definitely for women. I don't know how a man hitting a woman humiliates her. I think, if anything, it humiliates him. Because, seriously, how many guys out there believe that it is right to hit a woman? How many guys out there believe that they will ever be seen as in the right for hitting a woman? Oh, fuck, I've seen some terrible ads in this country about a guy sitting there talking about how he's going to sort out this woman when he gets home, talking to her on the phone amongst his mates, and his mates are supposed to go, "Oh, cool, dude, you sort that shit out." But instead his mates sit there and go, "That's not very cool, dude." Precisely what I'm trying to say. No man is going to sit amongst a group of other men and say, "Oh, I'm going to bash that bitch when I get home. Oh, fuck, I'll bash that bitch and sorted her out." No. Nobody does that. The person being humiliated in that situation amongst his male friends is the guy who perpetrated or claims to be prepared to perpetrate violence against a woman. We live in a gynocentric society. Even spontaneous female IPH incidents perpetrated in reaction to some perceived wrongdoing may still be instrumental in that they are motivated by a particular goal, whether revenge, control, self-defense, or financial gain. Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, outside of the motivations and level of premeditation for female IPH, there is little research on the immediate situational context of these incidents. Yes. Because if it was admitted that women instigated these incidents, if women created these situations, if women were, well, using these power narratives that they've tried to place on men, if this was their call, if this wasn't them, doesn't matter. Yeah. Of course you don't want to research that. Of course you don't want to reach the immediate situational context. You might learn something you don't want to know. And if you did research it, you'd throw that in the bin because you don't want to know it. You don't want other people to know it. Yet that information is coming out. I'm not saying this, that women create these situations because off the top of my head I thought it was the case. There is actually evidence to suggest this is the case. And it's been around since Erin Pizzey opened the first domestic violence shelter. It's just been hidden. As domestic violence incidents typically occur, how long is this video gone? Fucking hour. I'm going to have to make this a two-part. Occurs typically, because I've got to cover the data. Incidents typically occur in the victim and offender's shared residence. Follows that female IPH is significantly more likely than other female perpetrated homicide to occur in a family home shared with the victim. Okay, yeah, because when women kill out in the street, they do it pissed out the front of the nightclub, I get it. Additionally, while the private settings of most IPV incidents are likely to be limited, the examination of a bystander interventions research more recently highlighted the importance. I'm not learning much from that. I'm sorry. Look, I'm going to skip the rest of that. And I'll just read this because I think then we're heading for the data. Yeah, we're going to do the method. I'm not going to read you the method, but I will get straight to the data in part 2. Research aims and questions. The Australian Institute of Criminology was commissioned by the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet to undertake the current project examining the circumstances in which women perpetrate homicide against their male intimate partners. This study uses a descriptive and explorative approach that aims to analyse the role of situational triggers and broader contextual factors in female-to-male intimate partner homicide. More specifically, the project aims to answer the following research questions. What personal, contextual, situational factors are associated with women's perpetration of homicide against their male partners? Do these factors differ between Indigenous and non-Indigenous IPH offenders? Alright, and I will probably read that coming into the other half so we know where we're coming from. I've been the Anti-Theocrat. I'll see you in part 2. I hope this hasn't been too dreary, dragging on for an hour. See you in the next one. May gods remain fictional, and yeah. Ciao.